Why the hell are we spending so much money on all these games all the time? Hey everybody, welcome to the Show Board Game Reviews. This is a YouTube channel dedicated to the tabletop gaming hobby, and this is the first Monday show for September of 2021. Now, this is a monthly vlog where I talk about various different topics of interest to tabletop gamers, and this month's episode was brought to you by the rising costs of all the board games out there and just how much the costs have really started going up. And the interesting thing about this is this video is actually going to tell you how you can start still playing all these wonderful board games, keep your components, and start enjoying other games out there and keep your budget well within check. Because the idea of this video is this is going to be 7 games, well 4 games depending on how you look at it, but 7 games that you can play right now just by using all the components you have around your house to enjoy some great fantastic games. Because we all know the way the current board gaming market is it kind of teaches us to be kind of disposable gamers. We get these great fantastic games, we play through all these games, and we pay a pretty good penny for these games. And once we're through these games, we're pretty much taught to get rid of the game, unless there's an expansion coming, pass it on, whether we give it to Goodwill, pass it on to another person to enjoy, whatever we happen to do, and we just wait for the next great game to come out. But we don't have to do this because we're spending so much money for very little game and a lot of components when we should be paying a lot of money for a lot of game and not as much for components. And there are games that help you out there do this. Basically what I'm saying is all these years that we've been having all these great games, you know the games, Twilight Imperium 3 was replaced by Twilight Imperium 4. Why do I still have this box? We're going to find out in this video. Other games out there such as, remember this great old classic, the classical Descent? Well, don't get rid of Descent for the first, or get rid of the first edition for the second or the third edition. Keep the components around. You're going to find out exactly why. And let's go way back in the Wayback Machine. Remember this great one? Yep, still have it around. Want to know why? You're going to find out. All these great games, they're not disposable. You have these great games. When you're done with them, keep the components because you can have so much great fun with these, enjoying great games, great gameplay. And oh yeah, I'm not going to let Games Workshop get off the hook here because even their components and all their miniatures and all their stuff that they have can be used to keep playing some fantastic games all within your gaming budget. And if you don't have a lot of these games, well, there's always a big old box of miniatures that we can take because the big old box of miniatures definitely has lots of stuff for you to enjoy all these games I'm going to be talking about. Of course, no episode of the first Monday show will be complete without a focus on other YouTube content creators. So this month we're looking at 2 of them that are going to be extremely relevant. And the first one is going to be Sarastro's Painting, a channel that's going to teach you how to get all these wonderful miniatures painted out on your table and looking extremely fantastic. Now, I'm sure most of you have heard of Sarastro's Painting, but if you haven't, this is a YouTube channel that you have to subscribe to. Whether you're a painter or whether you're not, just to look at the fantastic work that he does on his channel with paints and miniatures, it's extremely fantastic. He has a wonderful painting style. He has some great fantastic tips on how to paint, and he takes some very basic painting tutorials and takes various different board games such as Descent, games that we've had out there such as Imperial Assault, games that we've had out there on the shelves for years, and he takes out the various miniatures and he goes step by step on how to paint these miniatures. You can take the new 3rd edition of Descent, take out some of the heroes or the bad guys, and he's got a walkthrough on how to get these miniatures looking extremely fantastic or tabletop quality, whatever you're looking for, just by putting a paint and a brush to a miniature and bring out some really fantastic stuff. We all know that playing these games is fun, they're really enjoyable, but having a great tabletop experience is even better when you have a wonderful presentation, something fantastic to look at, and seeing some wonderfully painted miniatures can definitely help the look, and that's definitely going to be relevant for the games we're looking at today. Next up is going to be Marco. Now, Marco is another painting channel which I really greatly enjoy. Between Marco and Sarastro, I get all the painting content that I really enjoy and really love to watch. Now, the difference between these 2 painters is the fact that they have very different styles on the way they paint, and I enjoy watching Marco for the simple fact that he likes to use different kinds of paints, different styles, and much different artistic way he does things. That's really enjoyable to compare the 2 different channels between Sarastro and Marco and the way their workflow works, how the results end up being different, and how they like to use different paints and different styles. It's really enjoyable. Matter of fact, one thing I really enjoy about Marco is that he has a very creative color palette when it comes to painting miniatures. I remember when I first started watching his channel, it's very interesting how he starts painting a lot of the miniatures, and he is very much more into the airbrushing side of things. But I thought it was really interesting how he uses a very unique color palette to create a lot of really creative color styles. And he does some very good blending, some very good work, and some very interesting techniques to make things look like, just through painting, without any tricks, without lighting or anything like that, to make things look like they have various different light sources. So what he does is he has a good way to show you how to create some really fantastic tabletop miniatures, or if you really want to make almost display quality, not museum, but display quality pieces that are wonderful to look and display on a shelf before you play the game. So these are two wonderful channels that have some great content, some great painting techniques, and they're really just wonderful to watch, even if you just want to see some fantastic miniatures painted. Even if you're not going to use these miniatures or play any of the games that they talk about specifically, it's just wonderful to watch these two content creators. Now, as usual, I'll leave links below in the YouTube comments to both of these channels. Go ahead and check them out, and go ahead and subscribe. You'll thank me later. Now let's go to get to this month's topic and tell you how you can get some great gameplay for well under $50 just using all the stuff you have on your table. We're going to talk about 7 games that bring some great enjoyment, allow you to recycle all the games that you have on your shelves, put more life into those classic games instead of tossing them in the recycling bin or putting them over in Goodwill, and have you having tons of fun on your tabletop, whether it's solo, whether it's with a friend, whether it's with some opponents, because these games are going to play all the way from 1 all the way up to 8 players. Now, I have these organized in an interesting way without giving away too many spoilers here, because 3 of the games use the same system, but they're very, very different. 2 of the other games kind of use the same system, but again, they're different. And then the last couple games, they use their very own unique systems, so they're not similar in any way. So I have these grouped up, and we're going to cover the first 3 games, which is going to be the games of Frostgrave, the game of Stargrave, and the game Rangers of Shadowdeep. Now, all 3 of these games are very, very similar. Well, they're from the same designer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and cover the similarities between these 3 games, and we're going to go ahead and razor focus on one of them. That's going to be Rangers of Shadowdeep. The reason why I'm doing this is because I don't want the video to go too long, but it definitely is going to give you a good idea of how these games play, because they are similar in their mechanics, and I'll talk about the mechanics, but they're very, very different in their execution, and they're all very, very different because some of these are very much solo focused, some of these are very competitive focused, but they all bring some interesting things to the table. Now, when we're talking about these games, the really cool thing about these first 3 games is that their systems are very, very similar. Basically, it's a D20 system, which is very nice because it's very easy to understand. So there's not a lot of dice to deal with. There's not a lot of weird things to deal with. There's not a lot of real weird rules or weird tables. The very first game is Rangers of Shadowdeep, and Rangers of Shadowdeep is a game that's for 1 to 4 players. And the basic idea of Rangers of Shadowdeep is every single player at the table is going to get a ranger that's going to be their main character, basically represents them. They're also going to get a couple points that they can spend to make their retinue or their followers, their units who are going to go with them out on various different missions. Because Rangers of Shadowdeep is a fully cooperative or a solo playing game, depending on how you want to play it, and it's a mission-based game. And every one of these missions tells a story, and these missions are broken down in various scenarios. And some of the results from some of the scenarios are going to carry over into the further scenarios, and has a very nice narrative to the way the game plays out. Now, the very cool thing about the game is that it is balanced for 1 to 4 players. The more real players you have at the table, the less secondary retinue you're going to have with your main ranger, but every single player is going to play their main ranger, and that's the ranger they're going to go through this full storyline for. And your ranger can level up, they can gain experience, they can gain various different abilities, and they're going to get various different gear, magical items, and they're going to may suffer long-term wounds. They may be able to have various different things happen to them. They may have their retinue that follows them may also level up, and it tells us very nice progressive storyline. There's multiple expansions for Rangers of Shadowdeep, and every one of these expansions basically is a new campaign system. So basically, for people who played games such as Descent or various games along those lines, you can take all the components from a Descent game and play those games or those miniatures and those figures in your Rangers of Shadowdeep game, because you're simply going to take those miniatures and you're going to tell the story that goes to this long storyline, and it's a lot of fun. Now, Rangers of Shadowdeep, the other game made by the same designer, is also going to be Frostgrave. Now, Frostgrave has some very important differences. One of the big differences is that without an expansion, the game of Frostgrave is a 100% competitive game. And in the game of Frostgrave, every single player controls a wizard. And you're also going to have your apprentice wizard. Now, your apprentice wizard is half as powerful as your main wizard. And you're basically playing your wizard going through these adventures and these campaigns. But it's a competitive game for 2 to 6 players. Now, I've heard that you can play Frostgrave all the way up to 8 players. I've never done it myself, but I have heard people doing it with some very good success with the game. But the basic idea is every single player controls an archmage, or basically a wizard trying to become an archmage. and you're going to represent one of the 10 major schools of magic. You have necromancy, you have basically the ability to throw fireballs, you have more of a healer type, you have all these different kinds of archmages, and you're trying to basically competitively go inside the city of Frostgrave, look for treasure, and basically get out faster than any other player without losing too many of your units. But it uses the exact same game system as Rangers of Shadowdeep. But again, this game is 100% competitive because you're going to have a Frostgrave city that's alive with undead, with monsters, with bad guys, everything like that, while there's other players on the table who are also competing over the same treasures as you. And they're basically also trying to work towards survival and level out their archmage by gaining various different spells, gaining various different magic items, gaining different abilities and treasures by going to the city of Frostgrave. Now again, like I said, Frostgrave and Rangers of Shadowdeep use the same underlying game system. It's a D20 system where basically the hero and the enemies, or the hero versus another player, you're basically going to roll a 20-sider, and you can compare the results of your 20-sider with various different bonuses and possible different penalties if you're doing ranged combat through spell casting or whatever it happens to be. And whoever rolls higher is basically going to be the winner of whatever the competition is, whether it's a spell casting competition, whether it's a sword fight, whether it's a bow being shot at an opponent, whatever it happens to be. And then whoever rolls higher is going to be considered the winner of that combat. And then there's going to be various different results, possible injuries depending on the result of that individual D20 roll. So the nice thing about the game system is both these systems is nice and clean. They're very easy to understand, and they're both game systems that you can teach very, very quickly. But again, the big difference between Frostgrave and Rangers of Shadowdeep is Frostgrave was 100% designed as a competitive game that has an expansion that allows you to play it as a cooperative game and allows you to play with more players, whereas Rangers of Shadowdeep is 100% a cooperative game, plays all the way through 1 to 4 players, and has a much more stronger narrative system to it. Finally, there is the game of Stargrave, and Stargrave is basically, I'm just going to say it, it's basically Frostgrave in space. Whether you like that or not, that's up to you, but some people like fantasy, some people like sci-fi. But the game of Stargrave is a much newer game, and is basically, at this point, because there's not a lot of expansions available for it, is basically a 2-player competitive game only. Now, I'm sure there's lots of homebrew, I'm sure there's lots of Facebook groups, I'm sure there's lots of things where people have already incorporated Frostgrave rules into the game of Stargrave to help you play this with a higher player count. I'm sure somebody by now has probably figured out how to make it a cooperative game also. But basically, that's the big differences between these 3 games. Now, the really great thing about these games is you can recycle basically everything you have around the house. And that's what's so great about these games. If you want to play Rangers of Shadowdeep, or if you want to play Frostgrave, just pick out your components from those classic fantasy board games that you already have collecting dust on your shelf. Descent, you have games such as Conan, you have games such as all these other games that are coming out there all the time, all these fantasy-based games, and you can basically recycle those components into those games. Additionally, if you want to play Stargrave, it's very easy to pick games such as Star Saga from Mantic Games and use the components from that game to go ahead and play this game. There's other space games. There's the Studio McVeigh game that basically tanked pretty badly, Sedition Wars, but if you have the components for that game, you can very easily play the game of Stargrave if you want. And that's what's so great about these games. It allows you to recycle your components and play these games. Now, I've given you a quick overview of exactly how these games play. Let's go ahead and razor focus on the game of Rangers of Shadowdeep so you can see the great gameplay that's in these 3 games. Now, the Rangers of Shadowdeep rulebook comes with about 130 pages, and the rulebook carries and covers a whole bunch of different things that help you build up your hero. It's going to tell you how to create a ranger. It's going to tell you how to use your build points. It's going to tell you how to do activation, turn movement, how to gain skills, how to do hand-to-hand combat, how to do range combat, various different status effects such as poison and disease, how to have different enemies in the game, how to go after treasure tokens, and how to level up, how to go through a campaign, injury and death, how to level up your companions, how to gain treasure. But the great thing about the main book is that it's going to tell you how to do the missions. Now, the very main book comes with 3 different missions, and every one of these missions is broken down into very specific scenarios. And again, every one of these missions, the individual scenarios in these missions are going to be basically tied together. And of course, there's plenty of more content out there for the game. There's a Facebook group for this game that has actually much more player-generated missions, and there's additional information for the game that's definitely something that you want to check out. And of course, for all the things I'm going to be talking about for today, always look for links down below in the YouTube comments. I'm going to have links to all these things for all of you to check out if you're interested in any of these games. And trust me, you're going to be interested in some of these games. Now, the storyline for Rangers of Shadowdeep involves the fact that there's a darkness that's come into the land and that the heroes or rangers sent out by the king to go ahead into the darkness itself and figure out what's going on. So I'm not going to give away too many spoilers, but understand that there is basically a darkness out there, and the heroes are working together to go through a storyline to figure out exactly what this darkness happens to be. Now, the game, to play this game, basically what you're going to need is you're going to need a nice, easy tabletop to play the game. You're going to need some miniatures. Again, we've already covered all the miniatures that you can use. Basically, use some Descent miniatures. Use any kind of different miniatures you have from any one of your board games. You can very easily play the game. Additionally, you're going to need some dice, and basically you're going to need some D20s. That makes it very, very super easy to play the game. If you don't have any D20s, you can very easily get these from any kind of hobby store, or if you play any RPGs, you have more than enough D20s to play this game and have a lot of fun with it. You're also going to need a hand of playing cards, and this is going to be basically standard playing cards. You're not going to need to go out there and get any expensive cards or anything like that. You're just going to use a deck of standard playing cards. And the cool thing about this is the playing cards are going to allow you to create your events and allow the stories to be replayable and add variety to the game. Because, for example, just use a simple example, not to give away any spoilers here, but it may tell you to shuffle up a deck of only heart cards only, maybe from ace all the way up to 9. And every one of those cards is going to represent an event that's going to occur every turn. So, for example, if you're doing a scenario that goes through 10 turns, you're going to flip over one of these cards at the beginning of every one of the turns, and something may happen, like a bad guy may spawn. The roof in the chapel that you're trying to explore is going to cave in, or maybe the floor is going to give away, or maybe some spiders are going to come out of the wall. Various different events which are going to add to the replay, add to the variety, and make sure every one of these scenarios are very much replayable. Next up, every single player is going to need to create the ranger, and you're going to have a certain amount of build points, and that's going to give you your base stats. Your base stats are going to give you things such as move, which is going to tell you how many inches you move. Your fight stat, which allows you to decide how you can do your hand-to-hand combat using swords, stabs, magic swords, two-handed swords, or anything along those lines. And also your shoot statistic, which is basically for range combat. Your armor, which means how hard it is for you to be hurt in any kind of combat. Your will, which is used for spellcasting. And yes, these are traditional fantasy rangers, so you can gain the ability to cast spells, which is kind of cool, kind of being a hybrid warrior mage versus a traditional true warrior. Or you can go for the full warrior if you want to. It's also going to tell you your health, which basically tells you how much hit points you have. And once your hit points are deteriorated, you're not necessarily dead, but you're definitely out of the scenario. And at the end of the scenario, you're going to roll to see if your hero is going to come back in the next scenario. If they don't, they may suffer some wounds. They may be out for a specific scenario over the next scenario while they try to recover these wounds. They may take permanent injuries. And again, these things can happen to your main hero, your ranger, and also to the retinue. So those things you're going to need to pay attention to. Luckily, you have a lot of heroic abilities and spells that can help make your hero more powerful and give you the ability to fend off all these dark creatures and go ahead and take these bad guys out. And not only that, you also get access to spells, like I said. And these spells can do various things such as cause, hold, cause you to heal, maybe do different things, but these are less strong, super wizard, mage type things that you may find in Frostgrave, because in Rangers of Shadowdeep, you are much more on the melee side of things. You're not wizards or mages or anything like that. You're getting some basic spells, some basic cantrips to help you go and take out these bad guys. Next up, your ranger is going to get some skills, which are going to help you do various different things. And these skills are extremely important because these skills allow you to do different things, such as detect traps, allow you to pick locks, because there are going to be some scenarios where you need to break into a castle or maybe into an old abbey or something like that. If you fail to pick the lock, more bad guys are going to spawn, wasting time. Of course, you can keep trying to pick that lock, but every time you do, it's going to use up one of your precious actions. And again, that event deck is working against you, adding more pressure and adding fun to the storylines you're going to play. Finally, your ranger is going to get recruitment points, and you're also going to get gear. Now, the interesting thing about recruitment points is recruitment points allows you to build up your retinue every single time. So again, like I said, in these three games, Rangers, Stargrave, and Frostgrave, the games are really about your main hero, whether it's your ranger, your wizard, or your spaceship captain, if we're talking about one of the various three different games. But you have your crew that goes along with you. And of course, you want to level up the crew, but they're basically your background NPCs. And if they die off, yes, it's a little bit tragic because they're going to come back and be replaced by level 1 heroes. But again, it's not that serious unless you lose your main ranger, your main wizard, or your main captain, because that's when things start getting tragic, because this is their specific story. But again, the recruitment points allow you to buy extra guys and extra units, and this allows you to keep on going when you lose your NPCs, or basically helping you on these storylines. So it's not terrible if you lose them, but again, it's something you definitely don't want to happen too often, because every time they die off, you're going to have them replaced by weaker creatures. So you want to keep them alive as long as possible. help them level up, because that way you start taking out the more powerful scenarios. Because in this game, you are trying to level up your ranger, and some missions can't even be accomplished unless your party of heroes is a certain minimum level, because these are some really challenging scenarios. Now, the basic flow of the game of Rangers of Shadow Deep is that every single round is going to start with a ranger phase. Now, during the ranger phase, you're going to activate your main ranger and a certain amount of NPCs or your retinue. I'm just going to call them retinue because it's easier for me to explain that way. You're going to activate a certain amount of retinue, and that's going to be based on whether we're playing a 1, 2, 3, or 4 player game. As you play more real players in these games, especially in Rangers of Shadow Deep, that's the less amount of actions you're going to get for your secondary heroes before the bad guys go. Because after the Rangers go, the creature phase gets to activate. And the creatures in this game have a very nice simplistic AI. It's really nice and fantastic. It's basically 3 if-and scenarios. So basically, question 1, does situation A exist? Yes or no? If yes, do this. If no, go to question number 2. When you get to question 2, does situation B exist? Yes or no? If the answer is yes, they're going to do something. If the answer is no, we're going to go to question number 3. For question number 3, if situation exists, yes or no? Do we do it? Yes or no? It's that quick and easy. The AI is very, very simpler. And then the cool thing about the AI is basically they're either going to work towards the NPC or towards the heroes. They're going to work towards target points. They're going to work towards various different scenarios on the board. It all depends on the kind of bad guys, the kind of AI, and the kind of scenario going on. Whether you're going into a graveyard, which has a whole bunch of undead slowly rising out of it, and you need to find the major mausoleum, or the master necromancer is raising all these undead, and once you kill the necromancer, you win the scenario, and the undead are going to keep coming up and start walking towards the heroes, or maybe they're going to spawn in various different locations, or maybe you're going to have some wells, some spirits are coming out of it. You need to shut down every single one of these wells. So as you shut down the wells, less spirits will come out of specific wells, but other spirits are going to come out of the other wells. Well, I'm just giving you some random examples of things that may happen, but that gives you an idea of how the AI for the game works. It's nice and super simple, and it's very easy to handle. After the creature phase, we have the companion phase. Now, the companion phase is where the rest of your companions, your retinue, gets to activate who didn't get to activate during the ranger phase. Now, again, as you have less players playing, you're going to have more heroes and your retinue and your companions activating. But as you have more players going, you're going to have more of them activating during the companion phase because you get less of them to activate during your ranger phase. But basically, anybody who didn't activate during the ranger phase, they're now going to activate during the companion phase. And finally, after the companion phase, where you activate the rest of your companions for all the players at the tabletop, then we're going to go to an event phase. And that's basically handled by the drawing of a card from a standard plain deck of cards. And again, that deck of cards is going to be based on various different scenarios. Those scenarios are going to tell you exactly what's going to happen when one of those cards flips over. Now, the game of Rangers of Shadow Deep and Stargrave and Frostgrave, these are all games that are going to work with a movement template where you're going to get basic movement based on your movement stats, which means you're not going to be using a hex grid or a square grid. All the movements can be basically based on using a measuring tape for all of our heroes, which is really cool. And the game has various different rules, such as rules for swimming, rules for falling, rules for following. As your ranger moves up, you can have your companions move with you. That's what I was trying to say. It also has rules for taking falling damage, rules for doing different things such as spell casting, rules for going ahead and using skills. So the game has all these things that allows you to create this wonderful, great narrative. Now, the base game of Rangers of Shadow Deep does come with quite a few missions, and every one of these missions is broken down in various different scenarios. Now, we're going to get a little bit of a spoiler territory, so if you don't want spoilers, go ahead and look away from the screen right now. But for example, the very first mission calls in our heroes to go and investigate a village. And once they're inside the village, various things are going to happen. The heroes need to hunt down clues. Once they get enough clues, they figure out exactly what's going on, and then they need to do something, and that's going to take them over to the second scenario where they're going to find out exactly what happened to the village, and they're going to take out the problem that caused the village to have its problems itself. Now, the interesting thing also about Rangers of Shadow Deep is not every single one of these missions are all about being out there in the grand open. There are actually some missions where you actually go inside buildings such as a great abbey, or you may go inside a castle, or various different things along those lines, and that's what keeps the game so exciting and keeps a lot of the replay and a lot of the great variety for the game here. Now, they do say in the rules that they highly, highly suggest not to play this game on a standard board such as a game like Descent, where you have very narrow corridors where there's only enough room for 2 heroes to go by at a time. Now, it doesn't mean you may not have some scenarios where you have to go temporarily into a small sewer system, but again, the idea is to have a little bit of a bigger opening where there's enough room for movement, enough room for maneuvering, and enough room for the good guys and the bad guys to do some really good, interesting interaction. Now, I've covered the basic games of Rangers of Shadowdeep and the game of Frostgrave and the game of Stargrave here. So how do you enjoy all these games and play these games for under $50? Well, the great thing about all these games is you can get the PDF for these games for about $20. Some of the games a little bit less, some of them a little bit more. Rangers of Shadowdeep, I definitely highly recommend you spend a little bit more than $20 and get the PDF for the deluxe edition because it comes with more missions and it cleans up some of the rules. It's basically effectively a version 1.5 of the basic game, but it does include a little more fun, a little bit more stuff, and it's just a little bit nicer looking. Additionally, if you want, you can get the hardback version of these games and you can go to Drive-Thru RPG and download a PDF, or you can go directly to the website. Again, for all these things, going to have the links down below so you can go ahead and get copies of all these games. Now, if you want, if you have a 3D printer, a lot of these problems can be answered for you really, really easily if you need to figure out how to play this game on the tabletop. You can go to Thingiverse and easily print out 3D terrain with no problem at all. And that definitely allows you to get this game played for under $50 just by using all the components you have laying around. If you don't have anything like that, it's very easy to use things laying around your house, such as cups, containers, or anything like that. Or you can even go through Drive-Thru RPG. It's a website I love to use, and it's probably a place that gets more money than I need my wife to ever find out how much they get. Glad my wife's not here to hear that. But there's very good things you can go down there and get from Drive-Thru RPG. Matter of fact, you can actually download files which allow you to cut out paper buildings, and it's probably like $4 or $5 to get a couple dozen buildings you can cut out of paper. Or you can even use some foam core, cut out some foam core, and build some terrain out of foam core. It's extremely easy to do it and allows you just to keep using all the tabletop games that you have, reuse those components, and have some great fun with a wonderful series of games. The next two games we have up are, again, two games from the same designer, and that's going to be 5 Parsecs from Home or 5 Leagues from the Borderlands. Now, both these games are very much cooperative games, which is very, very nice about them. And they both play from 1 to 2 players. Now, I'm sure that there are some Facebook groups and some various different websites that have some extra homebrew rules that allow you to play with more than that. But the basic idea of both these games, are designed to be full solo story-based games, which makes them very nice and exciting. Now, the basic difference between 5 Parsecs from Home and 5 Leagues from the Borderlands is 5 Leagues is a fantasy-based game, and 5 Parsecs from Home is more of a space-based game. Now, since the last 3 games we talked about, we focused on a fantasy. This time, we're going to go ahead and focus more on the sci-fi version, but let me go ahead and cover what these two games have in common. Now, both these games are very much story-driven games, and 5 Parsecs from Home is basically what I like to describe as Firefly, the solo miniatures game, because this game allows you to make a crew, kind of like Firefly. You're going to level up your crew, kind of like Firefly, and you're going to go on various different missions. Yeah, again, it's kind of like Firefly, and you're going to go ahead and get contracts. You're going to go ahead and level up your crew. You're going to go ahead and get resources in the form of money. You're going to go ahead and get better gear. Basically, like I said many, many times, you're playing the game of Firefly. You're going to make your crew, and the basic idea of this game is you're going to go out there and get contracts through various different people and give you the contracts, and you're going to have various different results of these contracts, and you're going to stay on a planet for a little while. Eventually, you may level up, get your ship improved, go ahead and fly off in your ship and go to a different planet because of various different things that are happening on the planet. Maybe you're going to anger too many bad guys. Maybe you're going to anger a very powerful, influential politician. Or maybe you're going to just cause too much bad heat with some of the gangs on a certain planet, and it's time to pack up and move on. But the great thing about this game is this is a D6 based system, and 6-siders is something that all of us have on hand. And this game plays out very, very great between the two games of 5 Parsecs from Home and 5 Leagues from the Borderland. But now that I've covered exactly what the basic idea of both these games are and the similarities and the fact they use D6 mechanics, let's go ahead and focus on 5 Parsecs from Home. Now, before we go any further talking about 5 Parsecs from Home, I do need to emphasize the basic game is designed as a purely solo game for one player to take their crew through various different things. Now, the game, looking at the second edition, does have rules for you to play multiple players, and even has a little section of rules about one player taking over the control of the bad guys, while one player takes control of their various different crew and goes on the various different things. So those rules do exist, but again, the main focus of the game is playing a solo game which is really, really great when you can't get your friends together, and that's what makes this game so darn fantastic. Using all the components you have on your board gaming shelves to play this great solo game. Now, the game of 5 Parsecs for Home, it does come with a larger PDF. The PDF rulebook is about 185 pages, and this is much, much more of a campaign-based game, where the basic idea of the game is this is a procedurally generated game where you're going to roll dice on charts, which is going to create scenarios, such as contacts or various different things, and you're going to use these scenarios or these dice charts to create a specific scenario that you're going to do a job or a mission. Again, if you're really thinking about Firefly, a lot of this stuff is going to make perfect sense from what I'm describing. Once you have your procedurally generated mission from a contact you may have gained or a contact you may have influenced or something like that, you're going to go ahead and do the tabletop mission. And the tabletop missions are nice and quick and easy to play. You're basically going to set up your heroes or your team of never-do-wells on your side of the table, and they're going to set up the bad guys or the mission, whatever it happens to be, to break into a bank, whether it needs to break into a security corporation and steal some data or something like that, or whether there's just an invasion coming to the planet and you need to get the heck out of Dodge as quick as possible, board your spaceship and get out of town before the planet is taken over. Various different missions are going to procedurally generate. Once you have your heroes on the board, the turn structure is going to be nice and easy in this game. At the start of every round, you're basically going to roll a couple 6-siders, one 6-sider for every one of your crew members. And if you get any 1s, or possibly 2s based on skills, but if you get any 1s, then your heroes, your crew can activate by assigning the 1s to any one of the heroes that you want. Now, any heroes that don't get assigned a 1 aren't going to get to activate on the quick step of the action phase. Once you've assigned the 1s to your heroes that you want to activate through the quick step, they're going to activate and do their actions. Then the bad guys are going to get to do their actions, and then the heroes who didn't get a 1 assigned to them, the rest of your crew gets to do their actions. And then basically this is going to keep going throughout until your heroes either flee because they can't complete the scenario, they've suffered too many losses. And again, much like the prior games, when I say losses, your heroes aren't immediately dead when they go down. You're basically going to roll on some charts to see if they have any long-term injuries or anything like that. But basically your crew will keep going on, especially if you decide to flee a battle. But if you manage to complete the scenario, gain the reward, break in, gain the loot, whatever it happens to be, the results of that are going to cause some more different things going to happen. Maybe you'll get a new contact. Maybe you'll anger your last contact because you didn't complete the mission, or whatever it happens to be. It's going to continue to create this campaign game. And that's what 5 Parsecs truly is. This is a campaign game where you're going to make your crew and you're just going to keep playing and playing and playing, leveling up your crew, getting better, telling these great stories, and again, feeling like you're playing a game of Firefly. Now, like I said, the game of 5 Parsecs from Home generally uses D6s, but also uses D10s to create a D100 system that allows you to generate stuff on tables. But most of the gameplay is going to be used with a D6. And at the start of every one of these campaigns, you're going to create your crew. And the basic idea of your crew is you're going to have a whole bunch of statistics. And again, it's not a lot of statistics, but these statistics can do various different things, such as covering combat, speed, movement, and all those things. But the cool thing about this game is how you're going to create your crew. You're going to roll up the kind of crew you have, and it's going to give you various different things. But the interesting thing about the nice thing about this game is your different crews have different races, giving you a very, very strong feel about the different races and giving you a very strong sci-fi feel. You may have a human character, you may have a robot, you may have an alien, you may have an engineer, you may have one of these various different races. All these different things are in the game. This game feels to me like they took a lot of inspiration from a lot of classic late 90s and early 2000s space shows that we all saw on TV. Or even if you want to go way back in time, yeah, it has a lot of influence from Babylon 5, Star Trek, has an influence from, like I've already mentioned, Firefly, a lot of games along those lines. So if you want to get that feeling in a tabletop game, look no farther than 5 Parsecs, because it's going to give you that feel, which is what's so fun about the game. After you generate your crew, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to figure out what kind of background, what kind of motivation, and what kind of class you have, and that's going to give you different things, such as extra resources, extra stats, and maybe different things such as beginning gear. After that, you're going to pick out the crew equipment, the gear that your crew is going to have. Maybe they're going to have some gadgets, maybe they're going to have various different kind of gear. And then the next thing you need to figure out is you need to build the ship for your crew. And the ship you're going to have, you're also going to level up by spending money on this thing. And it's a ship that you got to keep rolling. Again, not to keep making the references, but again, this harkens so much back to the game of Firefly. Now, the game of 5 Parsecs from Home does have a very nice, simple combat system. It's based on D6s. You're basically looking for target numbers. If you roll high enough on your target number, you basically need to roll higher than toughness. And if you roll higher enough on toughness, there's going to be injuries caused. Now, the game keeps it nice and flowing and nice and simple and nice and quick. You're not going to be keeping track of a lot of statistics such as hit points or anything like that. The game flow is very nice and quick, which is one of the things I really enjoy about this game versus the other 3 games I've already mentioned. The flow of it is very, very nice and quick. It's basically get in, do your movements, the opponent's going to do the movements, you're going to do your movements, and you're working towards your goals, which keeps the game nice and flowing very, very quickly. Roll a couple d6s, see the results, and move on. And basically you're going to have a whole bunch of different scenarios where you're going against enemies who have different AIs. And this is one of the strengths of the game here. Whereas opposed to the prior 3 games when we're talking about Frostgrave, Stargrave, and Rangers of Shadowdeep, in this game, you're going to have a lot more different variety with the AI of the enemies. You're going to have aggressive enemies, not so aggressive enemies, enemies that have different AIs, which are going to judge how they're going to set up, how they're going to act, how they're going to interact, and everything along those lines, which is one of the main big differences between these 2 series of games and the prior 3 games, is the variety that you're going to get and the fact that this game is much more procedurally generated. This game is going to tell stories that you're going to procedurally generate versus the other 3 games where you're playing stories that have already been written, going through basically a campaign feel. So if you're looking for more of a campaign-based system, I can highly recommend Rangers of Shadowdeep, Frostgrave, and Stargrave. Or if you're looking for a game where you can tell more of a serial-based thing where it feels like you're living through or playing through a TV series, these are the games you're looking for when it comes to 5 Parsecs from Home and 5 Leagues from the Borderlands. Next up is A Billion Suns. Now this is the first game on the list that actually could be a game from GMT Games, because this is a game that feels like a resource management game and a financial game mixed in with a space empire building miniature style game. And this game is actually really, really interesting because in A Billion Suns, every single player is basically playing a futuristic space game. But in this game, you are a CEO or somebody in charge of a corporation, and your one and only goal is to keep the corporation as profitable as possible. And the way you're going to be doing this is every single game that you play, and this can be played as a campaign-based game or as a non-campaign-based game, just as more of a one-off style game. And it does play from 1 to 4 players. There is actually a full solo rules PDF from the designer of the game that you can download for free. But the basic idea of the game is that you run this corporation and you are basically a CEO of this corporation. And you are exploring various different passes and various different areas of space. And when you're playing the game, you are trying to be as profitable as a corporation as possible without spending too much to go ahead and do your space exploration. Because if you spend too much, you eventually will be kicked out of the corporation, i.e. you lose the game. Now when you're playing this game, you can play this as a campaign-based game and play it solo, or you can play it with friends competitively, also playing through a campaign-based game. But this game actually does a lot of things that's really, really cool. Now the first big thing that this game does is it actually allows you to create multiple little tables, and every one of these tables represents a different separate section of space. And of course this is Space Empire way in the future, 3200 years AD or something like that. And basically jump gates have been discovered, corvettes, super star destroyers, well not super star destroyers, but big spaceships, small spaceships, warships, and all these things have been managed to be created and everything. And every time you play this game, you are going to have a certain amount of credits, and your credits are used for generating your ships that you're going to go and use against these various different little tables. And the game calls them tables, but basically every one of these tables is a certain section of the gaming table that represents one objective or something like that, where you're going to launch in with your jump gates. You're going to send your ships into the jump gate to go ahead and do various different things. It allows you to have various different tactical games going on multiple different tables where you may be doing different things. For example, one table you may be having to go out there and salvage some stuff to get resources. Another table you may have to go out there, explore, and do some scanning of some derelict ships. Or another table you may have to go out there and, yep, I know it sounds weird, but you may have to go out there and shoot down some giant space squids. Yes, it's in the storyline. It's kind of funny, but I'm kind of making it sound a lot funnier than it really is, because it's actually pretty cool how it works. But the interesting thing about this game is every time you play the game, you only have so many resources and credits that you're going to spend. And of course, you're going to go in deficit as you play the game, but you can use these credits to go ahead and bring out your space corvettes, your warships, your smaller fighter ships, and all these different things. And every one of these ships has a certain rating in it and a certain cost to bring it into play. And every time you bring the ships out into these various different tables, there's a cost involved. And if you lose these ships, you're not going to get the cost back. So you must do this constant balancing game when you're playing the game, where you must send ships out there that can be put out there as cheaply as possible, but still do the job that they're sent out there to do. Because if the amount of money you put into investing into the ships is not going to match the amount of revenue you get back for whatever you sent those ships out to do, you're going to slowly keep losing money. And then you're eventually going to be, you got it kicked out of the corporation, you're basically going to lose the game. Now in Billion Suns, every single player is going to have their corporation board, which is going to be broken down into 3 different sections. And every time you play the game, depending on how far into the campaign you've gone and how big of a size of a map with multiple different tables you have, you're going to have a certain amount of actions to perform every single turn. You can do these actions towards seizing initiative. The more actions you put towards seizing initiative, the sooner you can go in the round. Or you can put more of your actions towards jumping in, which allows you to open up the jump gates, which allow you to jump to the various different tables that you're playing on. Or you put some of your resources and your actions towards tactical maneuvers, which are tactics that you can use as you play the game. So you have this interesting blend of a game where you're constantly trying to watch your resources and your income and not overspend towards doing things in an effort to go ahead and produce more income than you're spending on things to do things. And it creates this really cool space-faring exploration, but a financial kind of exploration game, which combines a miniatures game with a space exploration game, which is exactly why I say this is one of those games that I would expect to come from GMT a long time ago, especially with all the interesting and really awesome mechanics in the game. Now, another cool thing about this game is you don't need to have a lot of really expensive or really high detailed components. In fact, if you have a copy of Twilight Imperium laying around, you can basically use the spaceships from Twilight Imperium and play this game, because the game doesn't need to have a whole bunch of fancy stuff. You don't need fancy paint up terrain. You don't need fancy paint up spaceships. And matter of fact, you can use the cheapest, most generic spaceships you can find. You can go over to Amazon. I'll put a link down in the show notes below where you can go get those cheapy little plastic spaceships. I think you get like maybe 100 of them for about $15. And you just use some spray paint and paint up various different colors so you can tell which kind of different ships belong to which players. And you can use those to play this game. The game is a $15, maybe $16 PDF these days. Get a couple of those spaceships and you can just put it down on the table and have a heck of a lot of fun. You just need a couple of maybe Pente stones or a couple little coins, whatever represent your actions. You need some playing cards and you need some dice, but no D4s, because D4s are gross. Well, at least that's what the designer thinks. And I think they're caltrops, not gross, but hey, that's his opinion. But the really cool thing about this game is this uses a really nice dice system when you play the game. You're going to roll dice in this game and you're basically trying to roll lower on the dice. If you roll the highest available on a specific die, for example, if you roll a D12 and you roll a 12, it's an automatic failure. But you're trying to roll low to try to succeed in things. So a ship that uses lots of D6s is a lot more powerful than a ship that uses a lot of D12s, because lower is better. The closer you get to 1, the better your chances. And some of your target numbers may be 7 or 8. So if you're rolling D12s versus a target of 7 or 8, there's a chance that you can fail at rolling under the 7-8. Whereas opposed if you have a ship that rolls a whole bunch of D6s, it doesn't matter which you roll on the D6, you're always going to roll under a 7 or 8. Of course, the caveat to that is if you roll the highest face side of that dice, whether it happens to be a D6, that means rolling a 6, rolling a D8 and rolling an 8, or a D12 and rolling a 12. If you roll the highest face side, then you automatically fail what you're doing. It's called a dud. So it's kind of a really cool mechanic where you're trying to roll lower under the dice that you're also using. So the gameplay is very simple. It's very easy to teach the game. The whole rule book, I think, is only about 65 pages, but it has a whole bunch of rules from campaign play. It has a whole bunch of scenarios, and I didn't mention this earlier, but you're also going to need a deck of cards when you play this game, because the deck of cards are going to help you decide what kind of contracts you're going to have and what's going to be available in the various sectors of space. Again, it calls them tables. Basically, every single table is basically a sector of space. And you don't need to have multiple tables when you play this game. You can basically just center or section off various sections every gaming table and say, this corner of the gaming table is the space where we're going for the mining. This section of space is where we're trying to fight off the space raiders. This section of space is where we're trying to take out the space squids. I keep saying that because it's actually fun to do it. It kind of reminds me of a couple other games, which is actually pretty darn cool. But that's how you're going to do it, and you're basically going to just put out your jump gates, and the game's going to play out over multiple rounds, and every single round is going to be broken down into various different phases. You're simply going to, when you set up the game, you're going to set up and decide what kind of scale you want to play, and the scale is going to decide how many actions all the players are going to have, and is also going to judge a couple different things. You're going to generate some contacts, which is going to tell you exactly what's going to go on. You're going to set up every one of the systems, and you're just going to go to the round structure. During the round structure, you're going to have the command phase, where you're going to assign your command tokens to various sections, deciding what you want to do, enough to jumping, enough to getting initiative and doing all those things and getting your special tactics. And then you're going to go to the part of the phase where the first person who has initiative is going to start taking their actions by jumping in and setting out their jump gates. Then we go through their tactics. Then we go through the end phase. There's a little bit of combat based on dice rolls. It's a super simple game system, which is really easy to play, very easy to understand, and like I said, it's a really, really rich and very fun and very enjoyable gaming system. And finally, the probably the least expensive, but probably the most fun and the best reference to your childhood is going to be the game of Gaslands Refueled. Now, the game of Gaslands Refueled takes classic Hot Wheels, a couple templates, whether you 3D print them out or if you just want to use some cutting out on some paper, combines those with some very simple dice mechanics and creates this wonderful Mad Max feeling of a style of game where every single player is playing, well, it's technically in the future, but it's 2018, so it kind of creates that little thing like Back to the Future did, where we're all wondering where our hoverboards happen to be. Well, kind of the same idea here, because we are playing Mad Max here. It's the future. Most of Earth has moved over to Mars, and the only thing left on Earth is kind of a wasteland where we have various different competitions and people fighting for gas, people fighting for fuel, and we're doing this through death races. We're doing this through competitions. We're doing all these different things. Just think Mad Max and a fight for fuel, where we're going to build up our Hot Wheels or our cars. We're going to add guns to them. Big guns, little guns, mines, oil slicks, mine trails, machine guns, lasers, sonic things, everything you can think of, and we're going to have those on some big old Mad Max death race, combat, carnage, thinking of anything you can ever think about with some kind of carnage when it comes to that kind of stuff. You can even go back and remember the classic PlayStation game of Twisted Metal with Sweet Tooth himself, and yeah, there's actually kind of a picture of Sweet Tooth in the rulebook here, where you just had that classic demolition style game where you're just going after each other and having a heck of a lot of fun. Now, the great thing about Gaslands Refueled, and we're talking about Refueled here, which is basically the second edition of the game, is you can take the PDF that comes with the game, you can download the PDF, and just go to the store with your friends, or even go with your kids, which is what I did, which was a heck of a lot of fun. Go to the Hot Wheel aisle, spend a couple dollars on Hot Wheels between each of you, and you're ready to have a heck of a lot of fun with a game that's crazy chaos, that just brings back a smile because it reminds you of your childhood and reminds you of the great fun that you can have having fun playing board games with your family or friends and not spending a heck of a lot of money. The rules for this game are extremely simple. Basically what you're going to do, and you can play this game campaign style, you can kind of play like a narrative style, you can basically play one-offs, you can play games where you have corporations, you can play games where you're going through this full long narrative where you're actually playing across game shows. There's a whole bunch of different chaos in this game. You can even do some really cool things where one person can control a gigantic monster truck Hot Wheel, and all the other players are working together to try to take out this giant monster truck. Whoever does so is going to be the grand winner. And you even go through these corporations where you have corporations which sponsor you, and these different corporations that sponsor you are going to judge what kind of vehicles you have access to. Some corporations will allow you to have access to sports cars. Some corporations will allow you to have access to motorcycles and helicopters. And some corporations will even allow you to have access to tanks, because you know a tank, it's always great, except for the difficulty is that they cost a lot of points. Because this is actually a point-based system of a game that uses modified D6. At the start of every game, whether you're going to play a one-off, a season, a sponsored, or a campaign game, every single player is going to decide how many points they're going to have. Average points is about 50 points, but if you want to go really crazy, you can go up to 100, or if you make a nice tight game and you want to play with a lot of players, because this game does play all the way from 2 to 8 players very, very easily. If you want to go for a higher player count, go for about 20 points, and that way everybody can have a turn, play the game, and still feel like they're in the game, because the turns in this game are extremely fast and furious, pardon the pun here. But the basic idea of the game is you're going to spend a certain amount of points on your vehicle. Big tanks may cost about 40 points. Smaller vehicles such as motorcycles may only cost 5 to 10 points. After you spent the points on your vehicles, whether you're buying 1, 2, 3, or heck, maybe 5 or 6 vehicles, you're going to get the chance to modify them with guns, landmines, oil slicks, flamethrowers, all these wonderful crazy things. And the fun thing about this is you can just use the Hot Wheels as they are, or you can go ahead and go to Amazon and buy those big old boxes for about $15 of the plastic little guns that are supposed to be used for action figures, and you can actually glue those onto your vehicles. I'll leave a link over in the show notes down below, and I'll put up an image to show you exactly what I'm talking about. Or if you happen to have a 3D printer, you can just print out some weapons and go to town gluing on the weapons, and even painting up the vehicles and make them look really cool to fit the match and the theme of the game here.
But the game is super duper simple. The game is going to be played out over rounds, and every round is broken down into gears. At the very start of the round, the very start of the game, every vehicle will start out in first gear. And you can only activate if your vehicle is currently in the gear or higher than the current gear of the special turn of the round you're in. So that means if you happen to have your car in 5th gear, that means you get to act in phase 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 of the round. But if your vehicle is only in 1st gear, you only get to activate in the 1st phase of the round. Now going into higher gears makes things crazier because you got to start using these longer movement templates. And this is a game where you want to build up a whole bunch of obstacles on the board and everything like that. So going really fast and furious may feel great if you're playing more of a race, but also means that you have a higher chance to slide and power slide and run into obstacles and go ahead and crash a vehicle and take damage. And there's multiple different vehicle rules you can play with. You can play with the basic rules or even play with the advanced rules, which adds a heck of a lot of fun and replay to the game. Now this is an extremely great game. It's very simple to teach. It uses a D6 system. And basically you're going to roll a certain amount of D6 based on the handling of your vehicle. Some vehicles handle better than others. You have your super sports cars that handle great at certain speeds. You have your motorcycles that have their bonuses. Tanks don't handle quite that well. But basically you're going to roll a certain amount of dice based on your handling. And rolling a 1 is going to create a hazard. Rolling a 2 or 3 is going to allow you to do a slide maneuver, or it may cause you to do a spin out maneuver, which may also give you hazard tokens. A 4, 5, or 6 is going to allow you to get rid of hazard tokens. Or what it may allow you to do is actually shift your vehicle into higher gears. Remember, if you go into higher gears, you get more actions on every single round. But again, don't go too far because some of these movement templates that you're going to use here can only be used at certain gears. So if you start going way too fast, it's going to be really hard to start doing some of those hairpin turns. Matter of fact, some of them may eventually become impossible if you're going way too fast.
So this game is extremely super simple to teach. Basically what you're going to do on your turn is you are going to pick a template. Now the rules say that you can't actually touch a template or do any pre-measuring. You need to basically lay out your templates like a doctor's surgical instruments on one side of the table, and you need to say, I'm going to do the veer, or I'm going to do the hairpin turn, or whatever it is. Then once you decide which action template you're going to pick, you're going to lay down in front of your little toy car or your little Hot Wheel, and you're going to move it along that little stretch of that little template. But before you do so, you need to decide if you're going to roll your handling dice. Now your handling dice, you don't have to roll them, and you don't even have to roll all of them. Now why would you want to roll them? Well, it's going to allow you to shift up in gears and start taking more actions, or maybe downshift or get rid of some hazards. But every time you roll those dice, you start taking a risk of gaining more hazards. And if you gain too many hazards, your car is going to flip or wipe out or something like that, or maybe run into something, or could blow up. After you've moved your vehicle across a template, depending on the movement of the template, if you're successful with your movement and don't wipe out, you get the chance to start shooting your guns. You may have front-facing guns, side-facing guns, rear-facing guns. You may have mortars, landmines, flamethrowers, heck, even your crew inside your vehicle. If you have a gigantic big bus with a crew of 8 people, crazy people with guns blazing, out the windows, whatever you may have, you're going to get a chance to shoot at the other players. Now you may want to shoot the players if we're having a death race. We may not want to shoot the players depending on what kind of campaign we're doing. Or you may just be playing a grand open narrative where it's just your objective is to be the last man standing, whatever happens to be, or it could just be a true race where you're just trying to get to the finish line without being blown up. That's the game of Gaslands Refueled in a nutshell. It's a fantastic, great game. And last on the list, but certainly not least, and what's so great about this game is with a PDF and a couple of Hot Wheels, you can be having a heck of a lot of fun. Gaslands is so popular in my house. I mentioned Gaslands. My son and I just had a big old 30-minute talk about it, so that's how cool the game is. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. This video is just basically a way for you to see that there are so many great ways for you to keep these classic great games that you have in your collections. Instead of getting rid of them, give them a new lease on life. Use all the components and bring them and use them in these great games that allow you to play enjoyable games that are story-based, narrative-based, competitive, solo, cooperative. All these games can be greatly enjoyed just with using the stuff that you have on your board gaming shelf. Now, I did want to cover a couple of quick other suggestions for people out there, because I know people are going to watch this video and just wonder how they can start enjoying some of these games in this video without a huge outlay of expenditure. So there's a couple different ways you can do it. Some of the great easy ways of doing things is just going to Amazon and finding little knickknacks and stuff like that that you can use to build up terrain, or you can go ahead and check out
out last month's video, last month's first Monday show, where I mentioned Black Magic Crafts, where they tell you how to design and make scenery and all these things just by using stuff around the house. It's so many great, easy ways to start making things and use them as tabletop gaming stuff for your tabletop games. Or if you want to, you can even get into 3D printing. 3D printers are coming down in price. And the fantastic thing about 3D printing scenery and trains, it does not have to be super high quality. You get a decent $200 3D printer, which make all the scenery and the terrain and the miniatures and the figures, and you can have some great fun playing all these games. Hope you enjoyed this video. It shows you how to put a new lease on life on the board games that are collecting dust on your shelves. Instead of looking forward towards the next $150 or the next $200 Kickstarter, think about looking at some of these great games that allow you to bring out your classic components for some of the games that you've been playing and kept on your shelf and collecting dust. Go ahead and bring them out and give them a brand new lease on life, all for under $50. Hope you have enjoyed this video. If you have any comments or questions, make sure you leave them down in the YouTube comments down below. I'll be sure to answer them as quickly as I can. You can also feel free to email me at off-the-shelf-board-game-reviews. That's otsbgr@gmail.com. I'll be sure to answer your email as quickly as I can. If you enjoy the content and you enjoy the video series and the channel and everything I put out, think about supporting the channel over on Patreon. Just $1 over in the tip jar over on Patreon can help me keep cover my costs and help keep the lights on. That's patreon.com/OTSBGR. If you enjoy this video and if you enjoy all the content, think about clicking that like button, click that subscribe button, and as always, thanks for watching.